A very good morning and warm welcome, dear 10th standard. Hope you all had a safe and joyful Diwali with all the precautions being taken. Welcome back for your online teaching, learning, science and technology B lecture. We shall continue with lesson number 3, Life Processes in Living Organisms, part 2. So let's proceed. In the last period, we began with the sexual reproduction in human beings. We have studied human male and human female reproductive system, gamete formation, and fertilization. We saw how male gamete sperm and female gamete ova are formed by meiosis. How are they produced? When are they produced? We have also studied what is fertilization, how a zygote is formed by the union of sperm and ova. Okay, now we shall study in the further part about what happens once when the zygote is formed. Okay, how the development and birth of a baby takes place. What changes a female body has to undergo to prepare herself for the pregnancy, for development and birth of the baby. This all things we shall study in the coming time. So first, let us talk about the development and birth. As I told you, we simply know what is fertilization. It is the formation of zygote, okay, by the union of haploid sperm and haploid ova that results in a diploid zygote. Where does the fertilization takes place? We have seen the fertilization takes place in the fallopian tube of the female reproductive system. Now what happens is this zygote undergoes repetitive mitotic divisions. Students, we have also studied what is meiosis and what is mitosis. So with mitotic divisions, this zygote forms embryo. Okay, or you can say embryo is formed from this zygote. Then this embryo is gradually pushed towards the uterus. We have also seen the organ uterus, and once this embryo reaches the uterus, it is implanted and further development then occurs in the uterus. Implanted means it is attached to the uterus, the uterine wall. Here the baby is being developed. It receives nourishment. Now how will it receive nourishment? Through a cord, that is placenta. Now this placenta is a cord that attaches the baby to the mother, or you can say it connects the baby with the mother. So the baby also receives proper food and nutrition throughout the 9 months from the mother. So placenta is an organ which is formed for the supply of food material and nutrition. Next, once this embryonic development is completed, which usually takes 9 months, which we all are aware of after the fertilization. Okay, from the start of the fertilization, you can count approximately 9 months it takes for a baby to completely develop. So it is also known as embryonic development because it is an embryo that develops. So here the development is completed, and once the development is completed after the 9 months, the baby is ready to take birth. Okay, in the picture you can see how the embryo looks like at the 8 weeks, just the beginning. Gradually after 12 weeks it is known as fetus. Then you can clearly see how the development takes place, how the growth takes place. Each and every organ starts to develop. Yes, the size of the baby increases, and how it looks like at approximately 40th week. Okay, so this is how the development of the baby takes place, and then the baby is ready for the birth. We shall watch a video now so that you get a clear idea of how the zygote is implanted in the uterine wall. Okay. See, you can easily understand how fertilization has taken place in the fallopian tube. The zygote is dividing mitotically to form embryo, which is then pushed towards the uterine wall for implantation. Here, the divisions takes place and the baby is developing. You can see a tube or a cord-like structure in front of the baby, which is called as placenta. I told you it is for the supply of food and nutrition to the baby. This is how, students, the embryonic development takes place throughout the 9 month, and from the 9 month onwards, the baby is all set to arrive and take birth. Hope you are very much clear with the developmental process of the embryo. Next, we are going to study is menstrual cycle. Before beginning with this, if you remember, while studying human female reproductive system, we have studied that the ovary of the female fetus, since the time of the birth, already has 2 to 4 million immature oocytes. Yes, and these oocytes at the time of puberty or maturity get matured, okay, and release every month. One ovum is released every month from the ovary. Yes or no? Okay, so this is some kind of change that is taking place in the female reproductive system. Yes. So, this menstrual cycle that we are going to study is a very regular natural change. Okay, it is a very natural change that occurs in the female reproductive system, which makes pregnancy possible. Okay, this menstrual cycle is very much required, students, for the production of oocytes first and maturation of the oocytes, and second is it prepares the uterus for the pregnancy. I told you previously that implantation of the embryo takes place in the uterus and the further development takes place, so the uterus has to be prepared. Yes, so this cycle, okay, has to take place. It is very much important. So what happens is, there are changes that start taking place at puberty, and these changes are repetitive. Okay, and it happens at the interval of every 28 to 30 days. So this repetitive changes that take place regularly are termed as menstrual cycle. If you go by the definition, it is like this. Female reproductive system undergoes some changes at puberty, and those changes repeat at the interval of every 28 to 30 days. These repetitive changes are called as menstrual cycle. We have also studied that this repetitive changes or the cycle stops at a particular age, which is called as menopause. Clear? Now we shall see what is this menstrual cycle, how it is important. Okay. This menstrual cycle is also known as hormonal cycle or reproductive cycle. Hormonal cycle because this cycle is totally controlled by 4 hormones. The 4 hormones important in this menstrual cycle are follicle stimulating hormone, also known as FSH, luteinizing hormone, LH, estrogen, and progesterone. Okay, these four hormones are very important hormones that control the menstrual cycle. Any imbalance in any of these hormones will drastically affect the female reproductive system as well the health of the female. Okay, so now we will study diagrammatically how this menstrual cycle takes place, what is the role of these hormones, and what happens when these hormones are secreted. Clear? Oocytes are in the follicles. Now these follicles are nothing but sac or cavity you can say, which are filled with fluid, and at the center they have oocyte. So every single follicle will have single oocyte. Okay, now let us see what happens. First, you can see changes in the ovary during menstruation. Okay, in the ovary, what all changes takes place, that is given on the top, and below it is given changes in the uterus during menstruation. What happens in the uterus, and above what happens in the ovary. These changes, let me tell you students, go hand in hand. Simultaneously these changes takes place. Together it is called as menstrual cycle. Now what happens? Let us see. In the ovary, the follicles are present which has oocytes. One of the follicles starts to develop with the oocyte. The follicle and the oocyte together start to develop, that you can see in the first two steps. Exactly below, if you see, it is the period of menstruation or the period of bleeding. Okay, we will come back to it. Further, let us see. Now this follicle, how does it develop? It develops under the influence of follicle stimulating hormone. Remember students, I told you this is a hormonal cycle which is totally influenced by hormones. So when the follicle stimulating this hormones stimulates the follicle, and hence the follicle along with the oocyte starts to develop. This developing follicle will further secrete estrogen. Try to just understand the connections. Looking at the picture, you will clearly understand. First, the follicles and the oocyte together start to develop under the influence of follicle stimulating hormone. Now this follicle which is developing, okay, while developing it secretes hormone estrogen. You can see in the diagrammatic representation, the estrogen is secreted from the follicle, the purple color diagram you can see. Okay, this estrogen then is responsible for the formation of endometrium or regeneration of endometrium. Now this endometrium students is a tissue, okay, lining of tissue that forms on the inside of the uterus wall. Okay, why endometrium is formed? Because if at all the fertilization takes place, the baby will be attached or implanted towards this endometrium in the uterine wall. Okay, so coming back, estrogen enhances the regeneration of endometrium tissue. This estrogen has been secreted by the follicle. You can simultaneously see in the uterine changes, that endometrium is forming the red color line. Okay. Next, this developing follicle completes its development while secreting the estrogen. Okay. Now the follicle has developed in the fourth purple color circular structure. It is shown that the follicle has completely developed. The oocyte inside has also developed. So the estrogen secretion now gradually stops. Next, what you can see, the oocyte is released from the follicle. Okay, the oocyte comes out of the follicle. Now this oocyte is totally developed. So the follicle bursts, and under the effect of luteinizing hormone, that is LH, okay, as under the influence of luteinizing hormone, the oocyte is released from the follicle, and this release of oocyte is known as ovulation. What it is known as? Ovulation. This release of oocyte from the follicle is known as ovulation, and ovulation takes place under the influence of luteinizing hormone. Clear? Then, the remaining tissue of the follicle which has burst, is now empty. It is just a piece of tissue. So this tissue of the burst follicle forms corpus luteum. The yellow colored structure you can see. Okay. Now this follicle is just a tissue which forms into corpus luteum. This corpus luteum secretes progesterone, which is the fourth hormone. It secretes progesterone. Now the endometrial glands, the glands of the endometrium tissue, they secrete their secretions under the effect of progesterone. Let me clear once again. The follicle which is without the oocyte, okay, the remaining tissue, now it is transformed to corpus luteum. This corpus luteum secretes progesterone, which in return influences the secretions of the endometrial glands. Now the endometrium, if you see, it is ready for the implantation of embryo. This endometrium is quite thick for the implantation of embryo, which also protects the embryo in the uterus. The fourth phase, if you see, period of secretions of glands in the endometrium. Now the endometrium is pretty thick. Okay, it is ready. The tissue has formed. It is ready for the implantation. If you try to closely understand along with the diagram, I am sure students you will understand it. If you all have any doubts, you can ask me. Okay. Now, we have studied that the fertilization takes place in the oviduct. Now, this oocyte which has been released from the follicle, it is waiting in the oviduct for the sperm to come and fertilize. But if the sperms do not come, okay, the oocyte, after 24 hours, it forms corpus albicans. Okay. Okay. If this oocyte is not fertilized, the corpus luteum that you saw, which was secreting progesterone, is now transformed to corpus albicans, which is the inactive form of corpus luteum. Now, due to this formation of corpus albicans, secretion of estrogen, progesterone stops completely. Why? Because corpus luteum was secreting progesterone, and now it has been converted to corpus albicans, which is inactive, which does not perform any work. So hence this also stops their secretions, that is stops progesterone and estrogen. Clear? Now hormones have stopped to secreted. So the endometrium will start to degenerate in absence of these two hormones. Because if you remember, under the influence of progesterone, the endometrium was secreting its hormones. Now progesterone is absent, so endometrium will also not be able to secrete its secretions, and hence the endometrium starts to degenerate. Okay. Now, whatever tissues are there of this degenerating endometrium, okay, I told you endometrium is a tissue. So, the degenerating endometrium and the unfertilized ovum that is present in the oviduct together are discarded out through the vagina. Clear? The ovum that is awaiting for fertilization in the oviduct, it has not been fertilized. So this unfertilized ovum, remember it is unfertilized, and the endometrium which is now degenerated, both together are discarded or removed out through the vagina. And this is accompanied with a continuous bleeding. This bleeding period lasts for approximately 3 to 5 days. It varies in each individual female as per their body, okay, but approximately it is 3 to 5 days. I hope I am clear with menstrual cycle. You try to once again understand, listen it carefully. If not, you can ask me. We again come back to the first phase, that is the period of menstruation. Clear? We started from there. Again we came back to period of menstruation where the bleeding occurs. Yes, endometrium and the unfertilized ovum are discarded. So this is how the cycle will go on. Again, the follicle stimulating hormone will stimulate the follicle. The oocyte will release after developing. It will convert to corpus luteum, progesterone, estrogen. If the ovum is not fertilized, corpus albicans will be formed, which is inactive. Progesterone, estrogen secretion will be stopped. Endometrium will not have its secretions, hence it will degenerate. Again the bleeding phase occurs. Okay, so this cycle goes on for approximately 28 days. And this is the menstrual cycle, which is very important for us to understand as well study. Here are the two pictures. Let's look at the first one. This is a structure of ovary, and what happens inside the ovary? Like I said you all, there is a follicle, you can see it is a sac-like. Inside the yellow color you have oocyte or the egg. Next you have the follicle is developed and the developed egg which is released from the follicle, that is known as ovulation, the release of ova. Then you have the follicle or the leftover tissue without the oocyte, which is now developing to form corpus luteum. This corpus luteum secretes progesterone, which in results in the secretion of the endometrial glands, okay, under the effect of progesterone, helping the endometrium to get ready for the implantation of embryo. Next you can see the corpus luteum is fully developed. At the same time, if the egg which is released from the follicle are waiting at the oviduct for the fertilization for the sperm is, if at all, not fertilized in the 24 hours. Okay, it has time span of 24 hours. In that 24 hours it does not get fertilized. It is released towards the uterus, and here at the same time the corpus luteum becomes inactive and it is transformed to corpus albicans. Okay, progesterone secretion is stopped, so further the endometrium secretion is stopped. endometrium stops developing along with the ova that has been unfertilized ova that has been pushed towards the endometrium, the uterus. It washes out of the body of the female through the vagina along with the continuous bleeding which lasts for 4 to 5 days. In the right side picture you can see how the 28 days cycle is divided into 4 phases. The first 5 days it is the bleeding phase. Yes, the uterine lining, that is the endometrium along with the unfertilized ova, is released out of the body through the vagina. The next 5 days, again the under the influence of follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, the hormones are released. The uterine, the endometrium wall starts to thicken. Here the follicle starts to develop. Then in the next 8 days, from 11th to 18th day, the ovulation occurs, which is usually on day 14 of the cycle. Okay, so on this 14th day, if the sperms are ejaculated in the vagina of the female, they travel towards the uterus and the egg is ready. So if they fertilize the egg, the further development, formation process of the zygote embryo will take place. Okay, so this happens, ovulation happens approximately on the 14th day, and the last phase that lasts for again 10 days when the uterine lining continues to thicken. Okay, it continues to thicken irrespective of the ovum has been fertilized or no. And then if the ova is not fertilized, the cycle is again repeated. If at all, last thing I will tell, if at all the ova is fertilized, students, obviously the endometrium will continue to thicken. Yes, the ova has also been fertilized. So this ova, after the fertilization with the sperm, forms zygote and then embryo is formed. This embryo is then implanted in the uterine wall, and at the same time this menstrual cycle is temporarily, I repeat, temporarily stopped till the birth of the baby and thereby the period of breastfeeding. Most important thing I'll tell you, students, this menstrual cycle, which is very natural, okay, it cannot be controlled by human interference. During these days, the women experience a lot of pain, lot of changes in the body, severe weakness, heavy bleeding. Again, I'll tell it depends from person to person. Okay, the bleeding phase is quite stressful and painful for the females. Also, there are high possibility of infections as well. So, it is very necessary for females to rest along and take special care, good care of themselves. Hygienic conditions should be maintained. Next time you see your sister, your mother, your female friends, any female in your circle is going through this menstruation or the bleeding phase, you come to know, take due care of them, do your own work and let them take rest. Okay, with this we complete today's session. Thank you so much. If any doubts, we will surely solve it soon. Till then, take good care of yourself. Yes? Thank you so much. Take care. Bye bye.